All right, guys. Hopefully the notes on arrays made some sense to you, and what you're going to do now is try to work on this next assignment using arrays, and I'm just going to build it up here so you guys can kind of get some ideas about how we would use arrays. Um, and then I'm going to have you guys finish it off. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to figure out the average high temperature in March, and then we're going to try to figure out the high temperature in March, and then you guys are going to try to figure out the minimum temperature in March, and we're going to do this using arrays. So I'm going to start out in the main method here saying system.out.println the average high temperature, that's how you spell temperature, in March was, and then here what I'm going to do is put a plus sign, and I'm going to call to a method that we're going to write down here below. So I'm going to call average high temp. Okay, so I'm going to put in a semicolon here. Guys, if this happens to you where you're kind of like running off the end of the little inner frame here, you can just go ahead and take this and slide it over. Okay, so you can give yourself some more room that way. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go down here. We're going to write in our own method here. So public static, actually not void, but double. Okay, so we want this method to return a double over here. So it's going to return the average high temperature, which we expect to be a fraction, so a double. So I'm putting double there, average high temp. Okay, put in our brackets so we know that the method body, all the code for the method goes in here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to search to find the high temperatures for each day in March. So to find the high temperature in March. Okay, so I've already done that. So right here I did a search, and this one right here is one you can see I already clicked on. So let's go ahead and go there. And what we have is for March 2020, these different high temperatures. So the first of the month it was 58 degrees, the second of the month it was 44. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over back into our program, and we're going to create an int array called daily high, and set that equal to those values that we just looked at. So 58, 44, and 45. And this is going to take a while, so I'll probably speed up the video for this, but you can see what I'm doing here. 45, 50, 38. Okay, so those are the daily high temperatures for every day in March. Okay, so then what we're going to do is we're going to create a double variable. Now this could be an int, but I think it just makes it easier for us later on if we make it a double, because we're going to divide it in order to find the average. But what we're going to do is just go and put this is the sum of highs. Okay, and so the sum is going to start out at 0, so we're going to put that in there. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a loop. So I'm going to use a for loop, which you just learned how to use, and basically loop through each of these days of the temperatures in March, loop through each of these indexes, and add the value here to the sum of the highs. So hopefully this is making sense to you. We're going to go ahead and go for. And then the for loop, remember how that works is we go int, and then what we're really doing here is we want to put in a variable that's going to tell us which value here we're going through in the array. So that's going to be an index, so I'm going to call it index, and I'm going to start with index 0. And then I want my indexes to all be less than however many days there are in March. So we could go over here and say, well, we know that there are what? Oops, looks like I went into April there, so we better backtrack. There's 31 days in March, okay? So I got to get rid of up to 47 there. All right. It goes up to 39 degrees. That looks good. Okay, so we could say again that there are 31 days in March. And then we want to say that we're going to increase the index by 1 each time. So after index 0, we want to go to index 1, and then index 2, and then index 3, all the way up to index, this would be index 30. So equals index plus 1. Okay, so that's how we're going to change the control variable for the loop. All right, but I want to backtrack here. So right here, this 31, let's say that I want to do this same type of problem, okay, but I want to do it for February, or I want to do it for June, or whatever, some month that maybe doesn't have 31 days, okay? So what I want to do in that case is do something like the name of the array, which is called daily high, and then I want to do dot length. And so that dot length right there is going to tell me how many elements are in the array. And so we're going to say index, which is starting at 0, needs to be less than, in this case, 31. But in February, this would be 28. And in June, this would be 30. So that would go up to index 29. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense to you guys. And again, ask questions if you have them. But let's just keep going with this, assuming that that's making sense. So what we're going to do in here is we're going to go sum of highs, and I want you to notice, to make your life a little bit easier. Once you get this showing up, where it's figuring out like, hey, you have this local variable called sum of highs, you can just hit return on the keyboard or enter on the keyboard, and it's going to fill that in for you. So we can say sum of highs equals sum of highs again, but we want to add on the daily high at a particular index. Now I'm putting spaces in there to make it kind of more readable for you, but you don't have to put those spaces in here or there. Okay, but let's just understand what this is doing. When index is 0, this is going to get the daily high at 0. Okay, so that's 58. And it's going to take 58 and add it to the sum of highs, which right now is 0. So 0 plus 58 is 58. 0 plus 58 is 58. And it's going to set sum of highs to 58. Then the for loop increases the index to 1. Okay, and since 1 is less than 31, we're going to do this again. So now it's going to say take 58 and add on the daily high at index 1. Well, the daily high at index 1 up here is 44. So now we're taking 58 plus 44 and finding that sum, which is what? 102. Okay, and then it's reassigning 102 to sum of heights. So I'll do that one more time for us. Then it's going to go ahead and increase the index by 1. So right, index was 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. Now index is 2. 2 is less than 31. So we're going to go in here again. I think this was 102. Okay, 102 plus the daily high at index 2, which is 45. So 102 plus 45 is 147. And now the sum of highs is going to be 147. So it's going to keep doing that for us all the way through all these numbers. So we don't want to keep doing that example, but we're just going to keep programming what we want. So at the end of this, we should have the sum of all these numbers in this array. And once we have that sum, we can go ahead and find the average. So the average is going to be a double, right? It's going to we're going to have some decimal number. So average high is going to be equal to the sum of highs divided by, in this case, 31. Okay, but what should I put in there instead of 31? Right, we should put in your daily high dot length. So we're going to put, instead of 31, daily high dot length, and that should find us our average high. Okay, now this is kind of review from stuff that we did before we were on this little hiatus here, but remember that we put up here that this average high temp is going to return a double, and that the double that we want to return is average high. So it looks like I misspelled that. So average high right there, okay, is going to be returned. So we're going to go in here, put return average high. And then just to kind of review what that's going to do, when we run this main method here, it's going to say the average high temperature is in March was. It's going to print that out literally. And then we're calling to average high temp, and we're going to have a number returned to here, a double value returned to there. So it's going to go through all this code, whatever the average high is, then it's going to return it to this space right here. So we're going to see when we run down here something like the average rainfall was, or what we're going to find is the average high temperature in March was something. So this is from a different example that I was doing before I actually started this, okay? So let's go ahead and try to run this. So the average high temperature in March was 46.580, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so if you want to put on there, for example, that it was that many degrees, okay, you could do that as well. So let's run it again. Okay, 46.5 blah, blah, blah degrees, and hopefully that makes sense to you. Okay, so it's adding all those up using the for loop and then finding the average by dividing it by however many numbers there are. All right, so the next thing that we want to do is find the maximum number, okay? The maximum, the high for the month, okay? The high temperature in March was, okay? And then we're going to do something like this, and we're going to say high temp. And we'll do some kind of thing like this again. All right, put in that semicolon. And then I'm going to have you guys at the end do a low temp, or I guess not the low temperature, but the lowest high, I guess. All right, so here's average high temp. And so we're going to make another method here. Double again, called high temp. Now, we want this same set of data so that we can loop through and basically find what the biggest number in there is, okay? And so hopefully this makes sense to you, but I'm going to just talk about it real quick and say, like, what we could do is we could just copy it from here and paste it in here. But what makes more sense in terms of programming this is that we copy this and put it up here, and then pass that value to the different methods, pass the array to the different methods, okay? So that they can both use the array, all right? And so we'll have to make some changes, but what we're gonna do, and hopefully you guys can kind of follow along with this, you're gonna see it at the end how it looks when you guys do this assignment, but just go ahead and follow along with me here. So I'm gonna cut this out of here, and I'm gonna paste it up here, okay? So that's the daily high array, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, now I want daily high to be passed to average high temp, okay? And that means down here for average high temp that I have to basically program it so that it's expecting to get this integer array, okay? So I'll call that daily temp, just to give it a different name in this context. So when I'm in this context, for average high temp, it's going to be called daily temp. When I'm up here in daily high, when I'm up here in the main, it's called daily high. So now it's just daily temp, okay? So down in here, then, what I have to do is I have to go daily temp, okay? daily temp, and again, daily temp. So I got to call it that instead. And I think that that should do it. Okay? All right. So now the same thing that I just did for average high temp, I got to do for high temp down here. So I'm going to go int array, and I'm just going to call it dtemp just to give it a different name again. Okay, so here's dtemp. That again is going to get passed to high temp here. So daily high in this context, the array is called daily high. But when it gets to high temp is saying I'm going to call it dtemp. All right. So what we want to do in this case is find the largest value in this array. Okay. And so the way that you want to think about that is you want to assume that the first value in the array is the largest value in the array. And then what we do is we go through and we say, is this number bigger than that number? No. Is this number bigger than that number? No. And we keep going through each one, and then we finally get to one where we're like, yep, that number is bigger than that number. So now that's the new maximum value. So you guys are going to do the same thing when you do the minimum. But let's just go ahead and say int high equals the first value in the array. So dtemp is the name of the array, at index 0 is the first value in the array. So we're saying that that's the high. Then we're going to go ahead and do a for loop. And so we're going to use a for loop like we did up here above. Okay? We're going to say we want to go through each index. So index starts at 0. Index is less than dtemp.length. Okay? And the index should equal the next index each time we go through the array. All right, so the next index is index plus 1. All right, then in here what we're going to do is we're going to check to see if dtemp at index, okay, so that's the next thing in the list, is greater, or in the array, is greater than high. Okay, and if this is true, if the temperature at this index is bigger than the current high value, then what we want to do is we want to change high to equal that value. So we're going to go temp, dtemp at index. Okay? So basically what this is doing again is going through the whole array and seeing if each value is higher than the previously recorded high. So 58 is a high, 44 is not greater than that, 45 is not greater than that, not greater, not greater, not greater, not greater, greater. And so now this becomes high. So that's what this is right here. High becomes 65 when index is whatever index that is, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay? So I can make this just a little more efficient by starting index at 1 here, because we're assuming that the thing at 0 is the high, so we don't have to start looking at different indexes until 1. Okay? So then at the end here, what we're going to do is we're going to return whatever the high temperature was. Okay? Return high. Now, I'm seeing that I made a little mistake here, but let me just go ahead and talk about what's going to happen here. The high temperature in March was called a high temp, and we're expecting that this is going to return a number, okay? A number. It's going to find the highest value in daily high, which is this integer array, okay? So what type of number are we expecting to get here? Well, if it's one of these numbers that are in here and this is an int array, then we would expect it to be an int, okay? Down here, we're saying we expect this to be a double. And so we know now that that really should be an int, because high is an int, and we're returning high. That's an int. So this has to return an int. Okay? So let's go ahead and run this now. Okay, the average high temperature in March was this. The high temperature in March was 65 degrees. And so we saw that in our code. And if you look through here, you're going to see that you can't find another number that's bigger than 65. Okay? So then what you guys are going to do is you are going to do the lowest high temperature in March was, and then I want you guys to finish that out, okay? So you're going to finish it out with low temp or low high or whatever, however you want to call it. I don't care what you call it. Send in the array and have degrees in there, okay? And then I want you to write the method for finding that lowest high, okay? And that's your assignment.